Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Also, most recently, the Rapporteur on the Critical Medicines Act, which I think is also something very important that we are working on at the moment. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me the possibility to say something about the HTA. I'm sorry that I will have to leave when I finish my speech because of another conference that I have to speak at on brain health. So a lot of things going on related to health at the moment, which I think is a good thing that we are keeping the momentum going in the European Parliament. When we speak about health technology assessment, it's something extremely important. Since I did my master and PhD at KU Leuven in Belgium on the topic of regulation of healthcare systems, patients' right to health insurance, cross-border healthcare, etc., HTA, cost effectiveness analysis, and all that definitely played a big role. So definitely. Enactment of the HTA regulation was a very important step in having more common European approach towards health technology assessment, but towards approval of medicines in the market in general. However, I will have to say that I think that HTA regulation is a bit of a missed opportunity. Unfortunately, because of two reasons mainly. So first, the final version was because of the council opposition of the big member states was diluted in a way that member states no longer have to, as it was in the original proposal, are obliged to accept joint clinical assessment reports, but they only have to give due consideration to joint clinical assessment reports, which means that instead of legal obligation, there is none in the final version of the text. Which means that essentially it's up to the member states to decide what kind of role they will give to joint clinical assessment reports. Of course, for some member states, I think this will be beneficial, especially for smaller member states, which will use joint clinical assessment reports instead of having to make their own clinical assessments. And in that sense, for a lot of small member states, this will be a good thing. But unfortunately, we lost the opportunity to harmonize more HTA on the European level. The second point is about the role of the HTA, in which I'm still a bit lost, because on one side, the safety and efficacy of medicines in the end will be decided and approved in the process conducted by EMA, and with the final decision for approval made by the European Commission. So essentially, EMA will say whether medicine is safe and efficient that it can be put on the market, and then based on that, Commission makes the final decision in the centralized approval process. Cost effectiveness analysis, for instance, how much money certain treatment costs per quality adjusted life year, which is the basis for making national reimbursement decisions. So what will be covered by the national health insurance systems will still be decided by the member states. So member states essentially will decide whether spending 50,000 euros for one quality adjusted life year is worthwhile to fund a certain treatment, to cover certain treatment in national health insurance. So this will remain a national prerogative. So HTA, covered by HTA regulation, kind of falls somewhere in between these two main processes which are essential for medicines to become available for the patients. So in that sense, for me, the role of HTA, since the regulation essentially excludes economic analysis of the treatments, essentially kind of, and what will be its final point and objective is still not completely clear to me. Be that as it may, my topic, and that is what the revision of the General Pharmaceutical Legislation and the revision and the EHDS could bring to the health technology assessment on the European level, is also something which I think is pretty important. First, when I speak about the EHDS. So the role of the EHDS to make data, much bigger amounts of data available than it is now for the so-called secondary use. So secondary use is the use of data not by medical professionals to treat individual patients, but but for research, for making policy decisions, and also for HTA. And in that sense, the idea of the health data space can really bring about much more data available for HTA than it is now. So first, what is important is, and I like to say that EHDS essentially makes health data a kind of a public good. So public good in the sense not that everybody can use it, but that it can be used for public interest by those who fulfill the necessary requirements. So the idea of the EHDS is that data sets which are now lying around unutilized in health institutes, research institutes, in hospitals, in universities, will have to be structured. There has to have to be systematized. They will have this systematization and structure will have to be made publicly available and cataloged. So, for instance, if you are a researcher who wants to do research in Italy and you need the data set on pancreatic cancer, and you see there's a data set available in Germany, you will be able to access this data if you fulfill the requirements. The requirements are that you are doing research for public interest, and that you use the data in a secured environment, and only anonymized or pseudonymized data can be used. That means essentially that when we speak about HTA, that also the same principles can apply to the HTA. That enormous amounts of data which are now not used, which are not structured, which are not systematized, will now become available for conducting clinical assessments in the HTA. So I think in that sense, EHDS can really provide a breakthrough, make much more data available, systematize and structure the data, and also what is important is the data is also interoperable. And the whole thing of the EHDS is that common technical standards, semantics, and certifiable interoperability of health data systems is made. Because one of the main problems with health data now is that between different member states, or even between the same member state, between different regions, it's not interoperable and cannot be used and cannot be shared. Now with the HDS, we'll create common standards, common procedures, common protocols, so that health data becomes interoperable, so that health data from one member state can be compared and used in another. Which means that also for reasons of health technology assessment, now much more data will become available under the same common standards across the EU. And I think in that sense, EHDS can really prove extremely beneficial for conducting of health technology assessment. We speak about that was my first point. On the second point, on the revision of General Pharmaceutical Legislation. So the idea of General Pharmaceutical Legislation is to stimulate more research, more innovation, introducing certain concepts like unmet medical need, and definitely the idea of this system is to incentivize the developers, the companies, to conduct more research, to gather stronger body of medical evidence, and in that sense, and if these studies are aligned with HTA needs, fewer post hoc adjustments or additional data requests would be needed by HTA bodies. So the idea is that these new concepts and standards are integrated into the whole process of pharmaceutical reform, of approval of new medicines, and of course that if this is aligned with the HTA, then definitely the whole body will be much easier. The whole procedure for HTA bodies will be made much easier. So the idea is that these procedures work together, that they work jointly, and that the same standards are used. And if developers of new medicines invest in stronger comparative trials or real-world studies up front, then of course the job will be made much easier for HTA bodies as well. So this is more or less what I wanted to say. Additional thing, maybe just to make it clear, is about the transparency of data. So transparency of data, publication of results of secondary data studies is very important. EHDS provides a framework for that, and also stakeholder involvement. I'm glad that what was already mentioned in the discussion, that HTA regulation contains strong provisions of stakeholder involvement, and this is for patients, medical professionals, etc. This is something that needs to be welcomed. I personally tried to introduce strong provisions on stakeholder involvement also in the HDS. Unfortunately, there was a lot of opposition by some political groups against that, unfortunately. So the final provisions of the HDS are not as strong on stakeholder involvement as I would like to be. But still, there are some provisions that they will be involved, but they won't have a full role in the decision-making process as I would personally like it to be. But nevertheless, definitely strong involvement of stakeholders is something to be welcomed. We have that in EHDS, maybe even stronger in the HTA regulation, and I hope that we'll be able to all continue to work together to improve the system on the European level. So to sum up, I think that both the standards like unmet medical needs from the GPL can incentivize more robust evidence, which will also be available and useful for HTA. That EHDS can provide much more data, interoperables and structured data for the purposes of HTA, which is also something to be welcomed. And I hope that HTA regulation, implementation of HTA regulation will bring about more harmonization of clinical assessments on the European level, but I'm sorry that the final legal text is not as strong on harmonization as it could have been. But that's a typical story when big member states do not want to have a fully fledged European health policy, but that's something that we have to face every day, unfortunately. So this is what I wanted to say. I don't want to be overly pessimistic. I think HTA can make a real progress. I think the EHDS and the revision of GPL can help there. I think it will be especially beneficial for the small member states, so they don't have to duplicate and do things on the national level. And I hope that in the end, this will bring to the de facto more harmonization of clinical assessments across the EU as well. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time, and thank you for inviting me to say something on this.